It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. See you, Doug. Introduce our speaker today, Tom Zimmerman. Wait till you hear this introduction. I wish I could have an introduction like this. Thomas Zimmerman II, Roman numeral II, currently works for WTVP as Director of Philanthropic Relations. Thomas works with the philanthropic community to oversee major gifts and acquisitions and to cultivate community partnerships throughout central Illinois. A native Peoria, with many local ties, he brings more than 30 years of nonprofit management and leadership experience to the position. He has worked with a number of industry-leading international organizations, including International Rescue Committee, Catholic Relief Services, and Oxfam America, managing large-scale projects, serving as liaison with community organizations and governments and the public, driving policies and procedures to high levels of operational efficiency, which gets really interesting. I'll give you a number. Remember this number, 30, okay? Graduated from Creighton, Omaha. Tom Zimmerman served in the U.S. Peace Corps in Kenya, which is where he fell in love with Africa and focused his career on managing and supporting humanitarian efforts and development programs to assist vulnerable populations. He has a master's degree in economics and social change and development from Johns Hopkins University. The significance of the number 30. First time I heard this, blew me away. Tom has lived and served as a humanitarian in Africa for 30 years. Wow. Ready to go? This is Tom Zimmerman.
Jumbo. That's how we start usually a conversation when we're in Kenya. Can you guys all hear me in the back? All right. When I'm working in Africa, I typically don't use a microphone. I get out and use my adult voice, Carrie. But for today, I'll try and use the microphone. But thank you again for that warm welcome. So here I am. I'm back here in Peoria. I grew up here. My parents moved here in 1974, and I was raised here. And the question most people ask me is, how the heck did you end up in Africa? And it's not a too complicated story. Growing up here in the Midwest and has instilled in me a number of values: the value of community, the value of friendship, the value of giving back to others, compassion for others. Those are the values and quality I think that I see, that I saw growing up here, and those are the ones that drove me to come back to Peoria, because I want those same types of values in my children. I have two boys, one's now 20, and the other's 15, and I can see those types of things being inculcated in them in their interactions here. But also what sort of led me to that, going to Africa, was also my faith. Faith is also a very important part of who we are and what we do. And the desire to want to give back to others, to serve others, has always been sort of in the nature of in our family. My father was a physician. He spent ungodly hours working, and it was all because his patients needed him. There was an opportunity to save somebody. It was an opportunity to make somebody's life a little better. And so all of these factors, our community, our faith, and the example I received in my family, all kind of drove me towards this. And sort of early, maybe late in middle school and in high school, I kind of said, well, I'm going to go to college, finish high school, obviously, go to college, and then I'm going to join the Peace Corps. And my mom kind of brushed it off saying, this is some kind of teenage thing, it's going to go away. I don't think she realized how serious it was until the day she took me to the airport and I was going on the plane to go to Kenya for the first time in Peace Corps. And she later told me the conversation she had with my dad as I left out the Peoria airport. And she looked at my dad and she says, he's going to love it and he's never going to come back. So I proved her wrong. I did love it, but I did come back. And it was quite a journey that I had, and I want to share a little bit about with that. Now, just so you know, this conversation, this talk is really out of a number of conversations I had with Tom Bauer over the last several months, where we would sit down and he would just ask me a question and I'd just start telling him what we did in Africa, what I was doing in these things. And he thought it was quite interesting, quite compelling, and wanted to share it with you. And I'm always happy to talk about Africa because, like Wayne, Africa has a very special place in my heart, always will, and it's quite a remarkable place. And I'll have to see this. Oops. Trying to there we go. So a lot of people focus on where I worked, and so on these maps, and I forgive me, they are difficult. There are over 50 countries in Africa itself, so it's kind of hard to get a map that's of any reasonable size to show the details. But these were largely the countries that I lived in, worked in, or spent significant periods of time. And so when you really start from your far left, Senegal, Ghana, Niger, Sudan, both north and south I worked in and lived in, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia. And then I also did a stint in the Holy Land. I was actually working in Gaza and did quite a bit of work in the West Bank for some Palestinian relief efforts. So as I've talked before, I started out in the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps really was about, I served as a small business advisor. And so Peace Corps organized you in levels of skill. And as a college student, a recent graduate, what kind of skills do you have? Well, you got a good education behind you, and you go out and you work with the people in the villages or the area where you're assigned. And what I found is that they were able to, so what we were able to do during the Peace Corps was really make those really great connections about learning culture. Culture was the most important part of that, being able to be effective in these countries that you work in. And I picked it up very quickly, how to learn culture and how to then become more successful in helping others, assisting others in what they want. And as a small business advisor, I was teaching people how to use the banking system, how we were organizing self-help groups, women's groups, to do various economic activities, such as selling kerosene, selling extra fruit, doing different types of businesses. A lot of it was agrarian. Zero grazing, introducing new types of technology to farmers and groups of farmers, in which we can help the farm-based economy or the individual help gain new revenue, then to therefore improve their lives. And so quite fascinating on how to get these things done. But the hard part was that culture, that understanding that culture and figuring out where we are. This isn't really about bringing in a ton of money and solving problems. It's about understanding how things operate in a country, and then unleashing that entrepreneurial spirit that's already there and encouraging that, because it already exists there. Technology is one of those opportunities that we can use as a tool, and anyone could use to help promote that and move that a little quicker. But a lot of what people need is already there. It's helping them harness those right activities. So I did my couple of years in Peace Corps, and as I was winding up my service there, the famine in Somalia happened. know, so a lot of you may recall Black Hawk Down, Mohammed Farah Aidid, and the terrible things that were going on in Somalia. Well, as I was wrapping up my Peace Corps volunteer, that opportunity, that famine opened up and they were looking for people and I signed right up. I didn't hesitate a second. They hired me to do cross-border logistics, administration, and finance, as well as some program management. And that was a big challenge. And Tom and I were having a conversation, what did your average day look like? And I said, there's no average day. Every day was completely and utterly different. And perhaps that's part of the reason I loved it so much, was one day we were dealing with a refoulement, which is it's technically an illegal act where a government forces out refugees out of the country and push them back into their country without any assistance. That's against all the Geneva Conventions. That's a big no-no. But all of a sudden, some Somali gunmen had raided some Kenyan businesses, stole their vehicles, and drove them across the border. And they had reason to suspect that a number of the people living in the refugee camp in Kenya were involved in it. And so they perpetrated the refoulement. So all of a sudden, we had several hundred people that had no home, no shelter, no nothing. What are they going to do? And we're out in the middle of nowhere in Somalia. Very dangerous situation, even if you have all that stuff with you. And so how do we respond to that? Pulling people together to do that, to respond to that, getting them food, shelter, water, and getting them settled into an area where they are, actually providing transport to get them to places that were not so isolated. And that takes a considerable amount of effort. But we were also doing rehabilitation. We were also doing training. We were also providing needed cash. We did cash for work types of programs. And so that helped people have their daily revenue so that we could turn the economy back around in Somalia. So many of these things were going on all at the same time. And each day was very different. Construction programs that were going on, some of them were winding up, some of them were winding down, and how to transition from those was very complicated. Again, learning culture, learning understanding, not so much why things are the way they are, but how things do, and then the understanding of that. The why will reveal itself, but understanding how to do things was very important. After working in Somalia for some time, the civil war in Sudan was exploding, and they needed some additional support there. And so I got a promotion. People laugh at that. I was promoted to work into a really hot war zone. Well, I was doing the same thing, running the administration, the finances, the logistics, as well as doing some more rehabilitation and program management there inside Sudan. And so that was a much larger challenge because of our sheer isolation of where we were. We had airplanes to fly us in, and I had a river, which is the Sobat River, which was about a 400-mile boat trip down to Ethiopia to escape. So wasn't a very easy place to get to, and certainly a challenge to work there. But again, diving into this, we ended up doing a lot of really interesting work there with extended immunization programs, as well as rehabilitating some of the buildings and providing what we did was food for work in this particular case because the cash economy had already collapsed. So again, another part of what we were doing is trying to improve the lives of the individuals there and try to stabilize those situations so that some sort of normalcy could return to these areas that had been either recently part of conflict or still part of conflict. We were trying to help alleviate the suffering that was going on there. After Sudan, we were evacuated out of Sudan for security reasons. And in fact, that was a very difficult period of time. We had a northern backed militia attack the village, and it was a massacre, and we got caught right in the middle of it. And I probably witnessed several hundred people getting gunned down as they just butchered the entire town that we were in. And we managed to escape by the skin of our teeth, really, to get out of there. And the UN had sent a plane, and under heavy gunfire, we actually ended up getting out of there. Plane got hit a couple of times, but it was very dangerous situation. The situation had not improved by the time, so I decided to go back and do my master's degree, and went back to Washington, D.C. and did my master's of economics. But the motivation I had for doing that is I could see sort of the ceiling of what I could offer people. And I recognized, looking at a program that in economics, well, how does economics help? Well, economics was part of it, helping to understand how things are operating on a larger scale, to then get to some more of the root causes of what's going on in that local area. So it provided a background for me to improve what I'm doing and help other, and if you will, improve the ability for us to be more effective in the programs that I work with. I returned back to Africa after my 2-year master's degree to work with Catholic Relief Services in Niger, then Ghana, and then Gaza. And so in each of those places, all of those were humanitarian crises that required a lot of attention to the details of what was going on, understanding the local conflict that was going on there, and trying to provide safe passage, food, emergency materials to individuals that are at high risk. And so I was all over Niger, and Niger is kind of an interesting country. Just as a side note, the very southern part of it is all kind of savanna, and the northern 7/8 of the country are what you would just probably say are those big sand dunes from the Sahara. So it's a very narrow strip that everybody lives on, and so in a very precarious strip of vegetation that is a very difficult place to be living at any time. But we were all along that southern part, and also part of the north of providing this humanitarian. Now remember, in each of these countries that we've worked in and I lived in, the conflicts are quite complex. It's not sort of like the North versus the South, or the Germans against the Americans. It is all sides for themselves. So there are religious conflicts. So it's between Christian and Muslim, or Muslim and animists, the local religions. And then based inside that, there are also clans and families. And so you have different clans or different ethnic groups that are fighting amongst themselves. And then you have geopolitical forces, sort of Arabs in general, and United Africans who want to fight that incursion. So each of these conflicts is quite complex, and understanding who the enemy is also very difficult. And again, that is about diving deeply and understanding the local culture and understanding what's going on around you. Again, that takes time, and it takes a great deal of effort. The humanitarian work we did with in Gaza was also a very important part. This was during the Second Intifada, where much of what was going on, the suicide bombers, was happening on a regular basis. There were a lot of, actually my second slide was really kind of the news you kind of see from all over the place. These were all the things that were going on while I was working and living in these countries. But in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, again, with the suicide bombers, the shutting down of the West Bank, the daily bombarding of Palestinian areas, it takes a very big toll on people there on both sides of the conflict. But it was something that we needed to be there for and needed to be a witness. And throughout all these different conflicts, you make friendships and things like that. And people understood how much I wanted to understand what was going on. And so in Gaza, I have been to Hamas funerals. I've seen the Islamic Jihad on their way to perpetrate terrorist acts. Not that I condone those things, but we were right in the thick of things. And our staff, this was sort of everyday life. This is, it seems strange, it seems very obscure, but in reality, this is all they have, and this is where they're at. And what we're trying to do is make that better. And so
it would take a rather large amount of hubris to assume that my humble efforts solve the problems. But one of the things I can do, reflecting back on the time that I spent there, as Tom mentioned, 30 years, I was able to go to Ethiopia very early on in my career. In fact, when I was during the Peace Corps, I took a vacation and I backpacked around Ethiopia. This was right after the fall of the Derg, which was the communist dictator. And this was the end of a 20-some year civil war. So a very dangerous time to be in the country. But because Ethiopia had been so distant and had been so inaccessible because of the conflict, when it opened up, I took the chance and said, let me go see it. And I backpacked around there. I didn't know any Amharic or any of the languages, but for almost 3 weeks, I backpacked through the highlands of Ethiopia and absolutely fell in love with it. When I was there, the stores, I mean, you could see that the people had been through an enormous traumatic event. Years and years of people being gunned down on the streets, murder, arbitrary incarceration, torture, economic collapse. You're in there, you can see the trauma on people. When you're on the street, there's nothing to buy. You go into a store and all the shelves are empty. It was a very bleak situation, and if you will, very difficult situation for them to be in. And one of the ironies is that they had a United Colors of Benetton in Mercato, which is a central marketplace, and it was filled with beautiful, colorful clothes. And I have no idea who they were selling them to, but it was this funny, unusual part of it. But the point I'm trying to make is when we got there, no food, nothing was in the shelves and things like that. Go back 25 years, 20, 30 years, and the end of my time in Africa, and the country was completely different. You had modern buildings, modern glass buildings. You had shelves full of everything that you could want. There was no, difference from walking into a mall here than there was a mall there. Computers, brand new cars, Ferraris. I'm a car guy, so you kind of notice those kind of things when you don't see them for a long time. The whole country had completely dramatically changed from absolute desperate poverty to something of which you would recognize as a modern country. And part of the efforts that we did, but a lot of the efforts of what those people did themselves, is help pull themselves together and bring themselves out of poverty. We played, as humanitarian organizations, a critical role in a lot of junctures to help make those things happen. But as you can see, there is a lot of progress going on. So we still see headlines like these coming around. But what you're finding is that these are now more of the exception rather than the rule. There's still problems in Ethiopia. They just have a ceasefire right now for a civil war that's going on now, and it was a horrible, terrible thing that they were doing to each other. But in Kenya, down the country just south of it, you see enormous economic growth, enormous embracing of their own culture, and enormous outreach to be part of the international community. And you see the levels of poverty falling considerably. So what I didn't want to do is have you guys walk away thinking of just the places, the difficult places I went to, but I also wanted you to say we went through a lot. The Africans themselves went through a lot, but they've gone through a lot of trial, and they're coming out as a much better country, and much better countries, I should say, in a much better position. There's a lot of hope in Africa. There's a lot of really great work that still needs to be done, but it's all moving in the right direction. Yes, you do have exceptions like the civil war in Ethiopia, or the fighting that's going on in Mozambique, where you'll have pockets of things going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those are more the exception. You still have outbreaks of disease, but it gets better, okay? And what we're seeing is a genuine improvement of what's going on in Africa. So some people ask me, why do I love it? What was it that I I love the most of it because you can, if I didn't express it now, how much I love being there and living there. What I do is the most appealing part of those things of it is the culture and diving into culture. And I tell you, they're so varied in the culture, what's going on there. Their understanding of how things need to work, their expression of themselves, their humor, all of these things are combined to create their culture. We have our own culture, whether we like it or not, but we do have a culture. But in Africa, it's on their sleeve. It's right there and it's ready to go. And it's ready for people to understand. And when you understand how to learn culture, when you understand and take the time to look into it, it is very rich and very rewarding. And so it's the secret sauce on how to make things work in Africa. It's the secret sauce of how to make things work in a lot of places. I usually tease my kids when we get some new kind of contraption or stuff. And you have to assemble it, and they'll give you, my wife will always give me the instructions. Here, you do it. And I'll always turn to the Spanish page and say, primero, abre la caja, open the box. And of course, they're like, what are you doing? And I said, culture is that same way, okay? You got to understand it to be able to partake in what's going on here. And so just like trying to teach somebody or follow the instructions in a language you don't understand, trying to do work in Africa or a lot of these countries without understanding the culture is about exactly the same thing. You really need to dive into that culture. And there are very few barriers to it. Language is sometimes a barrier, but in reality, most people want to talk to you. Most people want to communicate. Most people want you to understand what they're doing. Most people want to to help themselves, and they want to help you. And so language does not really become a barrier in most cases. Learning how to communicate without the language is a skill that you can learn, and a lot of people do. And a lot of people in Africa know how to do that as well. So when Tom and I were talking previously, he had asked me about the Rotary Club in Africa. And I said, well, in the places I worked, Rotary really wasn't around in conflict zones and things like that. But I did do a little research for you. Excuse me. And Rotary actually started in South Africa in 1929. And I believe it followed the British along their route of colonization and around Africa. But 1929, Johannesburg was the first Rotary in Africa, followed up slowly after that, shortly after that in Egypt. And then it moved into East Africa a number of years afterwards. So Rotary does have a presence. But Tom's question was, did I have much interaction with them? And again, they weren't involved in the things that we were involved in. There were Rotarians, I believe, that were interested or part of some of the areas that we were at, but they were certainly not active like this group is or on a philanthropic venture. But they were present in those countries, but not in the work that I was doing. And so right now, I believe they're in 40 countries. So 40 countries, the Rotary is in Africa, and I know they're in other parts of the world as well. And I think now is the time for Rotarians. I think as things are calming down, things are improving, where the Rotarians can be a much bigger influence and positive development force within Africa, as well as other countries in the world. Tom also asked me this great question, because he knows my mom so well, and I think some of you may know her as well. Did my mom like it? My mom took a couple of trips to Africa to visit me and see what was going on. My father also as well. And her first trip, I think, was very difficult for her. They came to visit me about a year after I had been to Kenya and I brought them into Nairobi. And what struck my mom was the level of poverty. What that level of poverty she had not seen before. Our little kids who were very emaciated, had been covered in like a soot. At night, they'll burn tires to stay warm, the homeless kids. And so that soot gets on them. So they get to be very dirty. And the kids are very thin. You can see the bones, their bones sticking out, and they're begging on the street. And my mom's first impression was to start crying, which then attracts a whole lot of attention. I'm like, Mom, stop, you know, please stop. And so what I did is I started talking to the kids in the local language, Swahili. And the kids, as soon as they knew I spoke Swahili, all of a sudden lit up. They were very excited about this. And so I talked to them and I was asking their names and what's going on and what they're doing. And as you normally do, you have a normal conversation with them. Even though they're beggars, you treat them with dignity. And that's all part of what I did with anyone I met. So what happens in Nairobi is that these kids are pimped out. What I mean by pimped out is that there's somebody there who's telling these kids to go and beg. And the kids get money from people and they go and give it to the pimp, okay? And these guys will provide them like a shack to sleep in and maybe a little bit of food and things like that. But that guy pimping them out drives a BMW and he's using people's sympathy to get these kids to beg for him so he can make a lot of money. Terrible. It happens not just in Kenya, it happens all over the place. But I'm onto that game. I understand what they're doing. And so the kids, my mom is here crying, and I'm trying to get her out of this situation. And then knowing the local culture, knowing how this thing is operating, I said, well, come with me. And the kids came with me and I went into a little store called a Maduka. And it's like a little shed and people sell different things. And I asked them for some milk cartons, you know, like you get in school, although they're a different shape, but largely your milk cartons. And then I had the store owner open them up, cut them open so you can't reuse them again, and then give them to the kids. So the kids got to drink milk, got something, I knew something that was going to help them directly, even though they're still in a terrible situation. But it was interesting, my mom saw that, it finally dawned on her, you know, that there are things you can do, even in very desperate situations, that can help improve an individual's life. And you should take every opportunity to do that. So each time I'm in Nairobi, I guess a lot of kids figured out that I do these kind of things because I'd always get the same kids coming up to me, and you create relationships with people, and which is a good thing. But I think my mom was taken back by that. She to this day, she doesn't know how I lived so long in Africa and how I could deal with that almost on a daily basis. But she understood it, and she got to view poverty that most of us, I hope, never have to see. But she also understood and I think appreciated my ability to be very comfortable in those situations and how to talk and get yourself into a better situation for both yourself as well as the individual themselves. Lasting friendships. Again, Tom had asked me, did I create, you know, that lasting friendships? Well, people are people wherever you go. And yes, I did have lots of lasting friendships, still have a lot of good friendships. The unfortunate nature of a lot of our work is, and living in these countries where you have proliferation of disease, such as when I was in Kenya, the AIDS epidemic was rampant. And that diminished at certain times, but then back when I was in Ethiopia again, it picked up again. And that was a delay of geography rather than any result of medical practice. But when you have these lasting friendships and you work in the field I do, a lot of the people and friends that I've had have passed on. And so my two best Kenyan friends, one died of AIDS or complications of HIV, and the other one died of a brain tumor. And so that's the lack of the modern medicine that we have that led to that. A number of my colleagues who work with me have also died, whether it was car accidents, whether it was gunshot wounds. A number of my friends had died from landmines. The complications that come with working in these war zones. Yes, being my friend is not a dangerous thing. I do still have some that are living, but you do create those lasting friendships. There are people that I still reach out to. People I worked with in Gaza, the head of Caritas there is like a second mother of mine. And so we have had a very long friendship and things like that. So friendships are very real. Friendships are very important. And they are sort of the spice that makes life go when you're in these countries. So I did want to keep some opportunity for you guys to ask me some questions here, but I will get to one more topic that Tom and I discussed about, and that was American perception. You know, people's perception of America. And I want to tread lightly here because I don't want to sound like I'm a politician. So I don't want to do that. So, but what you have is the perception of America, particularly when I first went out there, was one of very positive and hope of where people look to America for leadership, where that there was a great deal of respect for Americans and as for our country. And over the years, what I have seen is that has diminished. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's a Republican or a Democrat type of thing. But I do think that we are challenged in how we are perceived by others. And this isn't because there's a bunch of ugly tourists that are there or people misbehaving, but what they get is from their news. And what they get is what's going on in our country and how the impact that our country has on others. So where you'll see in Kenya, for example, when I was there, there was a big promotion of democracy, pushing multi-party democracy there. And that went against the grain of what the government wanted. Ultimately, multi-party democracy was enrolled in Kenya. It was a very fascinating transition, but a very painful transition for the country. Well, while near the same time, Algeria went through the same thing, but the Islamic fundamentalists won. And so in Kenya, we celebrated multi-party democracy because the opposition was able to get a foothold there. But when the opposition won in Algeria, we didn't support the ending because we didn't like who won the election. So we were promoting, we were contradicting ourselves in these things. And we find that that contradiction is there. It's not that I don't think it's because we're bad. It's just simply that when we see that either you're a Democrat or either you support democracy or you don't, they don't understand how you can support democracy in one area and then not promote it in another. They understand trade deals better than we do. Trade deals are usually stacked in a one-way street. It's to benefit us, but not them. And where the solution to some of these types of things is really looking at our foreign policy and looking at different opportunities why aren't we creating more win-wins? So it shouldn't have to be always win-lose, where we win, the country loses. Well, how can we make it so it's a win-win so both benefit from trade or the other things that we're doing, whether it's military, whether it's intelligence sharing, whether it's humanitarian. You always want it to be on the side where everybody's moving up. So it's a cautionary tale for us to think about when we go into these countries, that the perception that we have or people have of us are also deeply affected by the people they meet. And so when we're visiting a country here or traveling there, we play a role in that. Now, we can't solve the problem for the last 40 years or 50 years of foreign policy disasters all over the world, but we do have what we have today, and we can talk and speak to people and tell them how real Americans think. As I remind everybody, just whatever the government says doesn't necessarily reflect on what the people think, okay? What we as individuals are is just like you in your own country. Everybody's an individual, and there's a lot of good in America, and I think they understand that a little better, but there's a lot of misconceptions about what we're doing and what we're promoting. So it's one thing to be very cautious about. You got your microphone there ready. Good people have, go ahead.
Tom, you went from country to country and you left the Peace Corps. I understand that. Who paid you all this time? How'd you earn a living? That's question number one.
Sure.
And question number two, did you meet your wife in Africa or where?
Sure. All right, both great questions. So after the Peace Corps, I was on the payroll of the US government, but payroll was, I earned $50 a month. And so it was nothing to write home about. It was just enough money really to buy food and things like pay my rent and get around where I was. So I wouldn't really call it paid, but I certainly didn't need anything. Where I was stationed, I was living in a very rural area, so the cost of living was quite cheap. And so the funny thing is, even $50 a month, what I would do is I would save up money, and then I would hitchhike down to Nairobi on a long weekend, and then I'd go eat at a nice restaurant. And when I say a nice restaurant, it's like an Ethiopian restaurant or something like that. So it wasn't Alexander Steakhouse. It was more like Lou's Drive-In or something like that. But you didn't need that. Now the question is, who paid me afterwards? So I work with a number of different international organizations, International Rescue Committee, Catholic Relief Services. They hire people they're all salaried positions, and then it's like having a job here or anywhere else. They hire you to do a specific job, and that's how it is. Again, when you're overseas, I didn't need a whole lot I wasn't high maintenance. I didn't need to live like a king. I largely saved a lot of what I made, and working in these remote areas, there wasn't anything to spend the money on either. And all the things that you'd spend money on aren't things I'm really interested in doing, going to the bars and all the different things that people enjoy doing, nightclubs. That didn't interest me. So I was able to keep my costs, pretty low. And so having a lower pay wasn't so bad for me at the time. But things have changed since I moved here. But those were jobs that are paid. Where did I meet my wife? I actually met my wife in Ethiopia. She's from Ethiopia. Excuse me. I met her there on my transition from living and working in Gaza and moving to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And the funny story is, I actually met her the day I arrived. The office, the company, Catholic Near East Welfare Association, their program officer picked me up at the airport, and it happened to be a long travel day. Getting to anywhere to Africa means extra travel to get there. And I was hungry, and being a woman, she didn't feel comfortable. Again, this is the cultural aspect. She didn't feel comfortable going to a restaurant with a man by herself. So she actually called her cousin up, and it was my wife, and they came together, and I actually met her that day. And that sparked a friendship that led to dating, which led to getting married. So it was wonderful. But thank you for asking that question, because that's one of the best parts of Africa.
So thanks again for being here. In the 1990s, my son was graduating from MSU, and somebody contacted him, and he joined the Peace Corps, and he went to Mongolia.
Okay.
And he had a really interesting time there, a lot of horse riding, a lot of adventures. He was teaching Hemingway to the Mongolia gifted students.
Yes.
And just all kinds of stories. I'm up here because one of the things he did, they were given medical kits, and he had an antibiotic cream. And when he would go out, the homeless kids would come up to him, and to try to do something, he would apply this. Unfortunately, he got very sick with Giardia. And the Peace Corps has a building near Arlington Cemetery next to JFK's burial plot and his unborn baby boy, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And he wound up there, and we went to visit him, and he had Giardia and was really in bad shape. So my question to you is, how was your health over there?
Okay, well, that's complicated. And again, sorry to hear about your son. Did he live in a yurt?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Oh, wonderful. That's one of the local buildings, one of the local tent hut. Yeah.
Another interesting story, now that you bring that up, visiting friends over there. he was invited over for dinner and the mother was slaughtering a goat in the next room
Sure.
and with blood everywhere.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
and maybe that's where I got the Giardia, but lots of interesting
Sure.
experience.
Sure. Well, Giardia is a waterborne disease, so you got it from probably unwashed dishes or something like that. You know, or somebody didn't wash their hands when they did it. How is my health? Well, I've had malaria more times than I like to count. Actually, I forgot how many times I've had it. I've had, health is a very dangerous, endeavor in Africa. I remember my father had a infectious disease specialist talk to me before I left, and down at the St. Francis, and got into his office, and we walked in, and he had a book that was almost as thick as this bell. And he greeted me when I came in and put his hand on the bell on the book and said, "This is what we know you can get. This is about 10% of what you're going to be exposed to." And so part of what the Peace Corps trains us to do, and although it's not bulletproof, they teach you a lot about taking care of yourself. In fact, they give you a book called Where There Is No Doctor, which is the scariest book you'll ever read when you are sick in the middle of the night in Africa where there's no electricity, right? You know, you start reading it and go, "I have Ebola." You know, it's quite frightening. The best thing to do is get used to the local food. That means getting sick quite a bit in the beginning, and then once you ride that through, you should be okay. You need to get treatment very quickly, get it taken care of. I picked up a lot of tricks over the years on how to do those types of things. When you get malaria, you become anemic, you find different ways of getting yourself healthy much quicker. But the key important thing is make sure you get yourself help. So when people ask me about malaria, does it keep coming back? It does if you don't treat it, okay, and treat it correctly. How do I know you have malaria? Well, I'm kind of asymptomatic. In fact, the first time I had it, I almost died. I had it 3 weeks untreated, and as you see me today, by the time I left the hospital, I was 140 pounds lighter than I am right now. In fact, I went to after I got the treatment, I went to Italy, and my folks were visiting there, and I was wrapping up my time between Peace Corps and moving into Somalia. I walked into the hotel lobby, and my mom was there, and she didn't recognize me. And actually, I walked right in front of her, and she didn't know it was me. So health is a big concern for you, and it's due to the remoteness and also the number of things that you're exposed to. But you can survive, and you can do things. You just have to take it very seriously. So, part of the tricks that I've learned, Pepto-Bismol kills about 90%, 95% of what you can be exposed to through the food. You can use it as a preventative. So have a little before the meal, if you're not worried about where it was cooked, and you'll probably be okay. Have a little bit afterwards, you should be okay. Pardon me? Yeah. One of the things you do is you also keep up on your immunizations. And so one of the things I always did was talk to the CDC just to see what their recommendations were. And then I always talk to my doctor about those things. A lot of those yellow fever, typhoid, meningococcal, all those different things are quite vibrant. Typhus, they're pretty nasty. And you want to just be, the more proactive you are, the better it would be for you. But I don't want you guys all to walk away from here. I'm never going to Africa. No. There is great, all you got to do is just follow some basic guidelines and you'll be fine.